They called her Honey, Sweetheart, and the Help. To the billionaires dining at the Obsidian Rose was invisible just a pair of hands pouring vintage wine. But Julian Thorne, a tech mogul worth $40 billion, made the biggest mistake of his life the night he snapped his fingers at her. He was holding a crumbling 500-year-old manuscript that the world's best cryptographers couldn't crack. He thought Rose was just there to wipe up his mess. He didn't know that the woman wearing the apron had an IQ of 165 and was hiding a secret that could destroy his empire. When she opened her mouth to speak, she didn't just translate a sentence, she started a war. The rain battered the windows of the Obsidian Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, old money, and fear. Rose Vance adjusted her apron, her knuckles white. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. Her PhD in comparative linguistics from MIT was currently gathering dust in a storage locker in Queens, right next to the shattered remnants of her academic reputation. Here she wasn't Dr. Vance, the prodigy who had mastered dead languages by age 22. Here she was just Rose, the girl who fetched the sparkling water. More wine. Now. The voice was like grinding gravel. Rose didn't need to look up to know who it was. Table 4. Julian Thorne. Julian was the kind of handsome that felt dangerous, sharp jawline eyes like cold steel, and a suit that cost more than Rose's father had made in his entire life. He was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a company that seemingly owned half the world's lithium supply. But tonight, he didn't look like a master of the universe. He looked desperate. He had spread a series of high-resolution photographs across the pristine white tablecloth, pushing aside the untouched foie gras. "I don't care what the professor said, Marcus," Julian barked into his phone, ignoring Rose as she poured the Pinot Noir. "The translation is garbage. The sun sets on the river. It's a banking ledger, not a poem. I need the coordinates for the vault, and I need them before the board meeting on Friday." Rose tried to keep her eyes averted. Rule number 1 of high-end service: you are furniture. You do not exist. But as she pulled the bottle away, her gaze snagged on the document in front of him. It wasn't just any old script. It was a chaotic mix of Coptic structure with a localized dialect used by Venetian merchants in the 15th century, specifically a cipher used by the Medici banking rivals to hide assets. She froze. "What are you looking at?" Julian snapped, slamming his hand down over the paper. The sound echoed through the restaurant. Rose flinched. I apologize, sir. I was just—" "You were snooping," Julian sneered. He looked at his bodyguard, a mountain of a man named Kane, who stood silently by the velvet rope. "This is what happens when you let uneducated staff hover. She probably thinks it's a treasure map." He turned back to Rose, his eyes dripping with disdain. "Do you have any idea what this is? No. Of course you don't. You're worried about tips. I'm worried about a legacy. Go get me a fresh napkin. You breathed on this one." The humiliation burned Rose's face like acid. She should have walked away. She needed this job. Her mother's medical bills were piling up, and the rent on her studio apartment was 2 weeks late. But then Julian muttered into the phone again. "Tell the team at Oxford to try the Aramaic route. Maybe the symbol for water is actually silver." It was so wrong it physically hurt her brain. Rose stopped. She took a breath. She turned back. "It's not Aramaic," she said softly. The silence at the table was deafening. Julian slowly lowered his phone. He looked at her as if a chair had just started speaking. "Excuse me, the route," Rose said, her voice trembling, but gaining strength. It's not Aramaic, and it's not a poem about the sun setting. It's a warning. Julian laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. A warning. Listen, sweetheart, stick to the menu. I have 5 PhDs working on this. Then your 5 PhDs are idiots, Rose said. The entire section of the restaurant seemed to stop. The couple at table 5 put down their forks. Kane, the bodyguard, took a step forward, his hand twitching toward his jacket. Julian stood up. He towered over her. You're fired. Get the manager. The symbol you're covering with your thumb, Rose said, pointing at the paper under his hand. It looks like the Coptic letter for river, but the syntax is Venetian mercantile. In that context, the inverted curve doesn't mean river. It means bloodline. And the numbers following it aren't coordinates. They're dates of execution. Julian froze. His arrogance faltered for a microsecond. He looked down at his thumb, then slowly lifted it. The symbol was exactly as she described, an inverted curve. He looked back at her, his eyes narrowing. Who are you? I'm the waitress you just fired, Rose said. She untied her apron, let it drop to the floor, and turned to walk away. Wait. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Rose kept walking. She reached the kitchen doors. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What did I just do? I just lost my paycheck. Mom is going to kill me. Stop her! Julian yelled. Kane moved faster than a man his size should. He blocked the kitchen door, his face impassive. Mr. Thorne would like a word, Kane rumbled. Rose turned around. Julian was standing right behind her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a predatory intensity. He held up the photograph of the document. Read the next line, he demanded. I'm off the clock, Rose said, crossing her arms. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a stack of $100 bills, easily $2,000, and shoved them into the pocket of her cheap polyester uniform shirt. Read the next line. Rose looked at the money, then at the document. She felt a familiar rush, the thrill of the puzzle. It was the only drug she had ever been addicted to. She leaned in, ignoring the scent of his expensive cologne. She traced the faded ink on the photo. It says, she whispered, the debt is not paid in gold, but in the silence of the firstborn. Seek the key where the traitor sleeps. Julian's face went pale. He staggered back, gripping the edge of a nearby table. The traitor, he whispered. Uncle Marcus. He looked at Rose with a mix of horror and awe. How could you possibly know that dialect? There are maybe 3 people in the world who can read this variation. 4, Rose corrected, and the other 3 are dead or working for the Smithsonian. Julian straightened his tie. The shark was back. Get in the car. Excuse me. You just solved a riddle that has stalled a $10 billion merger for 6 months, Julian said. You're not a waitress anymore. Tonight you work for me. I don't work for people who snap their fingers at me, Rose said, turning back to the door. $10,000, Julian said. Rose paused. For one night's work, Julian continued, sensing her hesitation. Come to my penthouse. Translate the rest of the ledger. 10,000 cash. No questions asked. $10,000. That was 3 months of rent. That was her mother's heart medication for half a year. Rose looked at Kane, who was still blocking the door. She looked at Julian, whose eyes held a desperate, manic glint. She knew deep in her gut that this was a bad idea. This wasn't just a translation job. This was something dangerous. Traitor. Execution. Bloodline. 20,000, Julian said. Rose took a deep breath. Lead the way. The ride to Julian Thorne's penthouse was silent. They rode in a Maybach armored like a tank. The city lights of New York blurred past, distorted by the bulletproof glass. Rose sat as far away from Julian as possible. She was texting her mother, working a late shift, catering a private party. Phone might die. Love you. It was a lie, but the truth. I'm in a car with a billionaire who might be involved in a blood feud, would have given her mother a heart attack. The penthouse was at the top of the Steinway Tower, a needle-thin skyscraper that looked down on Central Park. The elevator opened directly into a living room that was larger than Rose's entire apartment building. The walls were glass. The floor was black marble. But the room wasn't set up for a party. It was a war room. Tables were covered in maps, old books, and laptops. 3 people were arguing in the center of the room. They stopped when Julian entered. "We found nothing on the spectral analysis, Julian," a short, balding man said. He wore a tweed jacket that screamed Ivy League. This was Dr. Aris Thorne, Julian's cousin, and the family's official historian. "Forget the spectral analysis," Julian said, throwing his coat onto a couch. He pointed at Rose. "Give her the ledger." Aris looked at Rose. He took in her scuffed non-slip shoes, her black trousers, and the stain on her shirt where she'd spilled a drop of wine earlier. "The catering staff," Aris scoffed. "Julian, we are discussing sensitive family matters. Get her out of here." "She's not catering," Julian said, pouring himself a drink. "She just sight-read the Medici cipher in the restaurant." The room went silent. A woman sitting at a computer, sharp-featured and wearing glasses, looked up. This was Sarah, Julian's head of security. "That's impossible," Aris said. "That cipher is gibberish. It's a mix of Venetian mercantile and Coptic structural syntax," Rose finished for him. She stepped into the room, her confidence returning. This was her arena now. Specifically the syntax used by the Brotherhood of San Giorgio in 1490 to smuggle artifacts out of the Ottoman Empire. Aris's mouth fell open. "Who are you?" "Does it matter?" Julian interrupted. "Give her the book." Aris hesitated, then walked to a climate-controlled glass case in the center of the room. He unlocked it with a biometric scan and pulled out a leather-bound book. It was rotting, smelling of mildew and centuries of secrets. He placed it on the table. Rose approached it reverently. She didn't touch it with her bare hands. "Gloves," she requested. Aris threw a pair of white cotton gloves at her. She pulled them on and opened the book. The pages were filled with the chaotic script she had seen in the photo. But seeing the whole thing, it was magnificent. It wasn't just a ledger, it was a narrative. "Well?" Julian asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Where is the vault?" Rose scanned the first page, then the second. Her brow furrowed. "There are no coordinates," she said. "You lied to me." Julian's voice dropped an octave. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "You said you could read it." "I can," Rose said, not looking up. "But this isn't a map to a vault, Mr. Thorne. It's a confession." "A confession. Written by Lorenzo Thorne," Rose read. "Dated 1502. "Our ancestor," Aris whispered. "The founder of the dynasty." Rose turned a page. He says, "I have built my house on sand and blood. The wealth I leave to my sons was not earned, but stolen from the order." "What order?" Julian demanded. Rose squinted at a complex cluster of symbols. "The Order of the Silver Wolf." No, that's not right. The Order of Argentum. The colour drained from Aris's face. He looked at Sarah, the security chief. Sarah immediately started typing on her laptop. "Stop translating," Aris said sharply. "Let her finish," Julian commanded. "Julian, you don't understand," Aris said, his voice high with panic. "If Lorenzo stole from the Order of Argentum, that means the rumor is true. The curse." "I don't believe in curses," Julian snapped. "I believe in lithium deposits. This book is supposed to lead to the deed for the Nevada land rights. Lorenzo hid it before he died." "He didn't hide a deed," Rose said, her voice shaking slightly as she deciphered the next paragraph. "He hid a weapon." "A weapon?" Julian laughed. "A 500-year-old musket. Who cares?" "No," Rose said. She looked up, meeting Julian's eyes. "A biological weapon, an early form of plague. He says he sealed it in the heart of the mountain to keep the Order from using it." The room was dead silent. "That's the Nevada site," Aris whispered. "The mining site. If we start drilling there, we unleash a plague," Rose finished. Julian stared at the book. He didn't look scared of the plague. He looked furious. "The deed has to be there. He wouldn't just leave a warning. Read between the lines. Look for the cipher within the cipher." "I'm trying," Rose said. "But some of these pages, they've been tampered with. Someone else has tried to translate this before. Recently." She pointed to a microscopic scratch on the ink of page 40. "See this? Someone used a modern stylus to trace the text within the last week." Julian turned slowly to Sarah. "Who has had access to the vault besides us?" Sarah stopped typing. She looked at her screen, then at Julian. "No one, sir. The logs are clean." "Then how do you explain the scratch?" Julian roared. Suddenly the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. The glass doors over the panoramic windows slammed shut with a hydraulic hiss. Emergency red lighting bathed the room in blood. "System breach," Sarah yelled. "Someone is hacking the building's security. They're coming for the book," Kane, the bodyguard, shouted, drawing a sleek black pistol. "Secure the package." Julian grabbed the book, but Rose held on to it. "Wait," she yelled. "I found something else on the edge of the page. We don't have time." Julian grabbed her arm. "It's a name!" Rose screamed over the sound of a siren that had started wailing. "The person who tampered with the book. They signed it in invisible ink, revealing themselves only under UV light or the red emergency light." In the crimson glow of the emergency lamps, glowing letters appeared on the margin of the page. Julian looked down. "To Julian, from your loving partner S." Julian froze. He looked at Sarah. Sarah stood up. She wasn't holding a laptop anymore. She was holding a gun, and it was pointed directly at Julian's chest. "Put the book down, Julian," Sarah said calmly. "And the waitress comes with me. She's the only one who can read the code to disarm the trap at the mine." Rose's heart stopped. She wasn't just a translator anymore. She was the key. And she was standing in the middle of a Mexican standoff, 40 stories above Manhattan. Julian looked at Sarah, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. "You, the Order of Argentum sends their regards," Sarah said. She cocked the gun. "Now give me the book, or I paint the walls with your genius waitress." The red emergency lighting turned the penthouse into a hellscape. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant wail of city sirens far below the soundproof glass. Sarah held the Glock with perfect stillness. This wasn't the posture of a disgruntled employee. It was the stance of a trained assassin. "The book, Julian," Sarah repeated. "I won't ask again." Julian's jaw worked. A vein pulsed in his temple. He was a man used to controlling every variable, and suddenly he was helpless. He looked at Kane, his loyal mountain of a bodyguard. Kane's eyes were flicking between Sarah and the distance to cover. He was too far away. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," Julian said, his voice low, trying to buy time. "Whatever the Order of Argentum is paying you, I'll double it, triple it." Sarah smiled thinly. "Some things aren't about money, Julian. They're about faith. The Order has waited 500 years for Lorenzo's plague to wash the world clean of greed. We aren't going to let a tech bro stop the cleansing." She shifted her aim slightly, pointing the barrel directly at Rose's kneecap. "Last chance. Drop the book, or the genius waitress never walks again." Rose's breath caught in her throat. She clutched the rotting leather ledger to her chest. Her mind, usually a symphony of logic and patterns, was a chaotic mess of terror. She looked at Julian. The billionaire looked back at her, and for the first time all night, she didn't see arrogance. She saw fear. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Give it to her." Rose started to lower the book. As she did, her eyes caught the reflection of the room in the black marble floor. She saw Kane shifting his weight. She saw Sarah's finger tightening on the trigger. "She's going to shoot anyway. She can't leave witnesses." Rose's brain snapped back into focus. Logic overrode fear. Sarah wanted the book intact. That was her weakness. Rose didn't drop the book. Instead, she took a quick step backward, toward a mahogany side table. On it sat a heavy crystal decanter of aged scotch and a lit silver candelabra, Julian's affectation for mood lighting. "No," Rose said, her voice surprisingly steady. Sarah blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no." Rose grabbed the candelabra in one hand, holding the open flame inches from the brittle, dry pages of the 500-year-old ledger. "You want the translation?" Rose demanded, holding the flame closer. The edge of the paper began to curl from the heat. "You need me to read the trap protocols. If you shoot me, I drop the candle. The book burns. The plague stays buried forever. Your mission fails." It was the biggest bluff of Rose's life. Her hand was shaking so badly, she thought she might actually set the book on fire by accident. Sarah hesitated. For the first time, the assassin's cool facade cracked. Her eyes darted from Rose's face to the flame. That split second of hesitation was all Kane needed. With a roar, the massive bodyguard launched himself across the room. He didn't go for his gun. He went for Sarah. Sarah spun, firing wildly. Bang! Bang! The deafening gunshots shattered a floor-to-ceiling window pane. Cold wind and rain whipped into the penthouse. Kane slammed into Sarah, tackling her into a glass display case that exploded in a shower of shards. They hit the floor in a violent tangle of limbs. "Go!" Kane bellowed, struggling to keep Sarah pinned as she fought with terrifying strength. "Thorne, get her out of here." Julian didn't hesitate. He grabbed Rose's arm, nearly yanking her off her feet. "Move!" He dragged her away from the fight toward a wall adorned with a massive abstract painting. He jammed his thumb against a hidden biometric scanner, disguised as a light switch. The painting swung open, revealing a brushed steel elevator door. "A panic room!" Rose gasped, stumbling inside as Julian pulled her after him. "Better." Julian slammed his palm onto the control panel. "Private egress. Bypasses the lobby. Goes straight to the sub-basement garage." As the heavy steel doors began to slide shut, Rose looked back into the red-lit penthouse. Kane was on the floor, not moving. Sarah was rising to her knees, blood streaming from a cut above her eye, raising her gun toward the closing elevator doors. Bang! A bullet sparked against the closing metal doors just as they sealed tight. The elevator dropped like a stone. Rose collapsed against the cold metal wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, still clutching the ledger. She was hyperventilating. Julian leaned against the opposite wall, his expensive suit torn his hair wild. He stared at the floor number indicator as it plummeted past the 30th floor. He looked down at Rose. There was no gratitude in his eyes, only intense, calculating fury. "You almost burned $1 billion asset," he breathed. Rose looked up at him, adrenaline turning her fear into anger. "I saved your life and mine." "You're welcome." "Sarah wouldn't have shot," Julian insisted, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "She works for an ancient death cult." "Julian." "Of course she would have shot," Rose yelled back. "God, I should have just stayed at the restaurant and let you stiff me on the tip." The elevator slowed and came to a smooth stop. The doors opened onto a vast, dimly lit concrete bunker filled with a dozen luxury cars. It was cold and smelled of gasoline and damp earth. "Come on," Julian said, stepping out. "We aren't safe yet. Sarah has backup. The order is probably surrounding the building by now." He walked briskly toward a sleek, matte black Aston Martin that looked less like a car and more like a weapon on wheels. Rose scrambled to her feet, hugging the book. "Where are we going?" Julian unlocked the car. He looked over the roof at her, his grey eyes hard as flint. "We are going somewhere nobody, not even the Order of Argentum, will look for Julian Thorne," he said. "Queens." It was 3:00 a.m. The Aston Martin, a vehicle designed to turn heads in Monaco, sat conspicuously double-parked on a rain-slicked street in Astoria, Queens. It looked like a spaceship that had crash-landed in front of a faded brick tenement building. "This is it?" Julian asked, skepticism dripping from his voice as he eyed the peeling paint on the front door of Rose's building. "Sorry, it doesn't have a helipad," Rose snapped. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still wearing her stolen catering uniform, now damp from the rain. They hurried inside, up 4 flights of stairs that smelled faintly of cabbage and old cigarettes. Rose fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking from the penthouse ordeal. Her apartment was a tiny studio. A mattress on the floor, a desk overflowing with books, and a kitchenette. It was clean, but it screamed poverty. Julian stepped inside and immediately seemed to fill the entire space. He looked around with a mixture of curiosity and distaste. He picked up a framed photo on her desk. It was Rose, 5 years younger, smiling broadly in a graduation cap and gown flanked by an older woman in a wheelchair. "My mother," Rose said, snatching the photo from him. "She has MS. The medication costs $4,000 a month without insurance, which I don't have, because I'm a waitress." She threw her wet jacket onto a chair and turned to face him. "Now, are you going to tell me what's really going on? Or are you going to keep snapping your fingers at me?" Julian placed the Medici ledger on her small kitchen table. In the humble surroundings, the book looked even more malevolent. "You heard Sarah," Julian said, loosening his tie. He looked haggard. The titan of industry was cracking. "The Thorne family legacy, it's built on a lie. Lorenzo didn't find a gold mine in Nevada. He stole something from this order, a biological agent." He ran a hand through his hair. "My entire life I've been told we are builders, innovators, but we're just jailers, keeping a 500-year-old plague locked up. And Sarah wants to let it out," Rose whispered, sinking onto the edge of her mattress. To cleanse the world. Yes, and she has the resources of an ancient secret society behind her. They have eyes everywhere, which is why we needed to go somewhere off the grid. He gestured around her apartment. No offense. None taken, Rose muttered. Julian leaned against her small refrigerator, studying her. The adrenaline had faded, and now he was just looking at her. Really looking at her. Who are you, Rose? He asked quietly. I had my team run a background check on you in the car. It came up almost entirely blank. No social media, no credit history, just a P.O. box and a job at the Obsidian for the last 2 years. He paused. But you read Venetian mercantile script faster than my cousin Aris, who runs the history department at Yale. You recognized a Coptic-based cipher at a glance. That's not a hobby. That's master's-level linguistics minimum. Rose looked away. The shame always simmering just beneath the surface bubbled up. It was harder to bear than the fear of the gun. I was at MIT, she said softly. Comparative linguistics program. Full scholarship. I was working on my doctorate. My thesis was on proto-languages, the root systems that connect ancient Eastern and Western dialects. It was groundbreaking stuff. I found patterns nobody else had seen. Her eyes stung with sudden tears. She blinked them back angrily. Professor Sterling, Dr. Arthur Sterling. He was my advisor, the dean of the department, a titan in the field. Her voice dripped with bitterness. He was stuck on his own book for years, writer's block, so I showed him my research. I trusted him. He was my mentor. Julian went very still. He knew what was coming. 2 months later, he published his magnum opus. Rose said, her voice trembling. It was my thesis. Chapter for chapter. He even used my specific translation notes. You didn't fight it, Julian asked. Of course I fought it. I went to the academic board. I showed them my drafts. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Who do you think they believed, the 22-year-old scholarship kid from Queens with a sick mother, or the tenured best-selling author with 3 honorary doctorates? Sterling didn't just deny it. He destroyed me. He claimed I was unstable, that I had become obsessed with him and forged the documents to frame him. He had the money for lawyers. I didn't. He got me expelled, blacklisted. He made sure that no respectable university would ever let me near their archives again. She looked up at Julian, her eyes burning with 5 years of suppressed rage. So yeah, I'm a genius, and I serve sparkling water to assholes who snap their fingers at me because it pays the rent and keeps my mom alive. Are we done with the biography portion of the evening? Julian stared at her. The silence in the tiny apartment stretched thin. He recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning. The hunger, the need to prove everyone wrong. He had spent the night treating her like furniture, then like a tool. But she was neither. She was a weapon that had been unjustly decommissioned. Marcus, Julian said suddenly. What? My uncle. The one the book calls the traitor. He was the one who brought Sarah into the company 5 years ago. He insisted she head up security for the vault. Julian's voice was ice cold. He didn't just betray me for money. He's one of them. He's with the order. He pushed off the refrigerator and walked over to where she sat. He didn't tower over her this time. He sat on the rickety wooden chair opposite her, bringing himself to her eye level. Arthur Sterling, Julian said. Is he still at MIT? Rose nodded, confused by the shift. Yes, he just got another grant for his groundbreaking research. Not for long, Julian said. He reached into his torn suit jacket and pulled out a satellite phone, the only piece of tech he'd grabbed from the penthouse. The deal has changed, Rose. Forget the $20,000. Rose bristled. Are you kidding me? After I saved your life? 20,000 is insultingly low for a partner, Julian said. Rose froze. A partner? I can't stop Sarah and the Order alone. I have the resources, but I don't have the knowledge. You are the only person, Allah, who can read the rest of that book. You are the only one who can figure out how to neutralize the trap Lorenzo set in Nevada before they trigger it. He leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto hers. Help me save my company and stop a global pandemic, Julian said fiercely. And when this is over, I won't just pay your mother's medical bills for life. I will buy MIT's linguistics department and rename it after you. I will hire the best lawyers in the world to exhume Arthur Sterling's fraud and bury him under it. I will give you your life back, Dr. Vance. It was an offer made by the devil delivered in a studio apartment in Queens. But it was the only lifeline she had been thrown in 5 years. Rose looked at the rotting book on the table. The key to a plague. She looked back at Julian Thorne, the man whose arrogance had started this night, but whose eyes now held a desperate sincerity. We need coffee, Rose said, standing up. If I'm going to translate 15th century plague protocols, I need a lot of coffee. Julian allowed himself a small, genuine smile. I'll buy the coffee shop. Just a cup will do, Thorne. The silence in the Queen's apartment was shattered not by a gunshot, but by the chirp of Rose's phone. A severe weather alert notification lit up the screen. Rose ignored it, her eyes scanning page 84 of the ledger for the 10th time. It doesn't make sense, she muttered, tapping the rotting paper with the end of a pen. Lorenzo Thorne writes about the vault lock as a harmonic convergence. He says the sun cannot enter without the shadow. Julian was pacing the small room holding the satellite phone. He stopped. Poetry again. We don't have time for metaphors, Rose. I just got a ping from the perimeter sensors I set up on the block. 2 black SUVs just turned onto the street. No plates. It's not poetry, Rose snapped, looking up. It's a fail-safe, a biometric lock from the 1500s. The mechanism requires 2 distinct inputs simultaneously. The sun refers to the Thorne bloodline, DNA. But the shadow... She trailed off, her eyes widening as the realization hit her. The shadow isn't a person, it's knowledge. Specifically, the knowledge of the Argentum dialect. The vault won't open for just a Thorne. It needs a Thorne. And a translator. So they need both of us alive. Julian realized, his face grim. Or, Rose said, her voice dropping, they need you for your blood, and they need to torture the translation out of me. Crash. The front window of the apartment shattered inward. A canister hissed across the floor, spewing thick white smoke. Tear gas. Move! Julian grabbed Rose's arm. He didn't head for the door. He kicked the heavy oak dresser over, blocking the entrance, just as heavy boots slammed against the wood from the hallway. Fire escape! Julian commanded, coughing in the rising smoke. They scrambled out the back window onto the rusted metal grate of the fire escape. The rain was torrential now, a freezing downpour that soaked them instantly. Below in the alley, shadows were moving. Up! Julian pointed to the roof. They sprinted up the slippery metal stairs, the sound of their footsteps masked by the thunder. They reached the roof just as the door below burst open. "They're on the roof," a voice shouted from below. It was Sarah. Julian scanned the rooftop. It was a flat expanse of tar and gravel connecting to the neighboring buildings. "We have to jump," he said, pointing to the next building over. There was a 4-foot gap between the parapets. "Are you insane?" Rose yelled over the wind. "I'm a linguist, not an action hero." "Tonight you're both." Julian grabbed her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. They ran. Rose screamed as she launched herself into the void. For a terrifying second she was airborne, the wet alleyway 4 stories down yawning beneath her. Then she slammed onto the gravel of the adjacent roof, rolling hard. Julian landed beside her, nimble as a cat. He hauled her up immediately. "Keep moving. My extraction team is meeting us at Teterboro Airport, but we have to get to the car first." They scrambled down the fire escape of the second building, dropping into a side street away from the SUVs. The Aston Martin was parked a block away, looking alien and sleek against the grim backdrop of wet asphalt. As they slid into the car, the leather seats hugging them, Julian hit the ignition. The engine roared like a waking dragon. "Put your seatbelt on," Julian said, his voice calm, but his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Rose buckled up just as the 2 black SUVs screeched around the corner, blocking the end of the street. Men in tactical gear poured out, raising assault rifles. "Get down!" Julian yelled. He didn't reverse. He slammed the car into gear and floored it. The Aston Martin surged forward, doing 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Rose squeezed her eyes shut. She felt the car swerve violently, heard the thud, thud, thud of bullets impacting the armored chassis, and then a sickening crunch as Julian clipped the front of one of the SUVs, spinning it out of the way. They blasted through the blockade tires, screeching as they drifted onto the main avenue. "Are we dead?" Rose asked, opening one eye. "Not yet," Julian said, checking the rearview mirror. The second SUV was in pursuit, its headlights blinding in the rain. "Read the book, Rose. Figure out what waits for us in Nevada. Because if we survive the drive to the airport, we're flying straight into hell." For the next hour, while Julian drove with the precision of a Formula One driver, weaving through traffic at 120 miles per hour, Rose forced herself to focus. She ignored the nausea, the fear, and the sound of the pursuit. She immersed herself in the mind of Lorenzo Thorne. "He felt guilty," Rose murmured, tracing a paragraph on the last page. "Guilty about what?" Julian asked, taking a sharp turn onto the highway ramp, finally losing the tail. "The weapon," Rose said. "He calls it the breath of Judas. He didn't just steal it. He created it. Lorenzo was an alchemist before he was a banker. He synthesized a toxin intended to target specific genetic markers." Julian went silent. The car sped toward the private airfield. "It targets the dopamine receptors," Rose translated, her voice trembling. "It doesn't kill you instantly. It drives you mad, paranoid, violent. It turns a population into animals." She looked at Julian. He sealed it away because he realized that even the Order was too dangerous to hold it, but he couldn't destroy it without releasing it. So he buried it. They pulled onto the tarmac at Teterboro. A sleek Gulf Stream jet was waiting, engines whining. Julian stopped the car. He turned to Rose. The arrogance was completely gone now. He looked tired, human. "My Uncle Marcus," Julian said quietly. "He's been pushing for aggressive expansion into hostile territories for years. He doesn't want to cleanse the world, Rose. He wants to sell the breath of Judas to the highest bidder as a weapon of war. Then we have to destroy it, Rose said firmly. For real, this time. Julian looked at her. You know, yesterday, I would have fired you for looking me in the eye. Yesterday, Rose said, clutching the book. I thought you were just a suit with a checkbook. And today. Rose opened the door, the wind from the jet engines whipping her hair. You're the getaway driver. Let's go. The Nevada desert was a stark contrast to the claustrophobia of New York. It was vast, silent, and scorching hot. The Thorne lithium mine was a scar on the landscape, a massive open pit that spiraled down into the earth with a network of tunnels branching off into darkness. Julian and Rose stood at the entrance of the old sector, a decommissioned shaft that hadn't been opened since the 1950s. Julian was wearing tactical gear he had pulled from the plane's emergency locker. Rose was wearing oversized cargo pants and a Kevlar vest over her uniform shirt. The tracking signal on Marcus's phone ends here, Julian whispered, checking a handheld device. They're already inside. The vault is at the lowest level, Rose said, her memory of the map in the ledger burned into her brain. Sector 4, the sanctum. They moved into the tunnel. The air grew cool and stale. The only light came from the chem lights Julian dropped every 50 feet, and the tactical flashlights mounted on their shoulders. They descended for 20 minutes, the silence oppressive. Why isn't there any security? Rose whispered. No guards. Marcus is arrogant, Julian replied softly. He thinks he's the only one who knows we're coming. He wants to savor the victory. They reached the bottom of the shaft. Before them stood a massive circular door made of iron and bronze, oxidized green with age. It was covered in the same strange symbols as the ledger. And standing in front of it, bathed in the light of portable floodlights, were Marcus Thorne and Sarah. Marcus looked like a caricature of a villain, an older, softer version of Julian, wearing a pristine beige suit in the middle of a dirty mine. Sarah stood behind him, her gun trained on the tunnel entrance. Right on time, nephew, Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. And you brought the help. How thoughtful. Julian stepped into the light shielding Rose with his body. It's over, Marcus. The board knows. The authorities are on their way. The board? Marcus laughed. The board cares about share prices. When I sell what's behind this door to the consortium in Geneva, shares will skyrocket. Defense contracts, Julian. The ultimate deterrent. It's not a deterrent, Rose spoke up, stepping out from behind Julian. It's a madness plague. You can't control it. Marcus sneered at her. Ah, the genius, Waitress. I've heard so much about you. Why don't you come here and open the door? Or what? Julian challenged. Marcus nodded to Sarah. Sarah didn't aim at Julian. She aimed at a stack of yellow crates near the tunnel support beams. C4 explosives. Or I bring the mountain down on top of us, Marcus said pleasantly. I have the antidote formula, or at least I think I do. I'm willing to risk digging myself out. Are you? Julian tensed. He calculated the distance. Too far. Rose, Marcus said. The book. I know you have it. And I know the lock requires the harmonic convergence. Julian provides the blood. You provide the cipher. Do it, and I let you walk away with $1 million. Rose looked at the massive door. She looked at the explosives. Then she looked at Julian. She walked forward. Rose, Julian said, his voice laced with warning. He's right, Julian, Rose said, her voice flat. We have no choice. If the mine collapses, the canister might rupture anyway and leak into the water table. We have to open it to contain it. She walked past Marcus, ignoring him, and stood before the door. She opened the ledger to the final page. "Place your hand on the center panel," Rose commanded Julian. Julian hesitated, then stepped forward. He placed his palm on a recessed plate in the center of the iron door. A hidden needle pricked his finger. He winced but didn't pull away. The mechanism hissed, tasting the Thorne DNA. Click. One tumbler engaged. "Now the voice," Marcus said greedily. "Read the inscription." Rose traced the symbols on the rim of the door. They were intricate, shifting depending on the angle of the light. "It's a phonetic key," Rose said. "It requires the exact pronunciation of the High Venetian dialect, spoken with the cadence of a prayer." "Read it," Marcus yelled, his patience snapping. Rose took a deep breath. She looked at the symbols. The greedy man drinks gold and dies of thirst. The righteous man drinks water and finds life. She knew exactly what the symbols meant. She also knew that Lorenzo Thorne, the man who built this trap, hated greed above all else. She turned to Julian, her eyes locked with his. She telegraphed a message with her gaze. "Trust me." She began to speak. Her voice was clear, melodic, resonating in the cavernous space. The language was ancient, guttural yet beautiful. But she wasn't reading the inscription on the door. She was reciting the warning from page 12 of the ledger. The warning that detailed the purge protocol. As she finished the last syllable, the ground shook. The gears of the vault door groaned. "Yes, yes," Marcus shouted, stepping closer. "Open!" The massive iron door began to slide open, but instead of revealing a dark chamber, a blinding, searing blue light spilled out from the crack. A mechanical hum rising in pitch filled the air. "What is that?" Sarah yelled, backing away. "That," Rose shouted over the noise, grabbing Julian's hand, "is the sterilization system." "The what?" Marcus screamed. "Lorenzo didn't just hide the plague," Rose yelled. "He rigged the vault to incinerate the contents if the wrong password was spoken. I just triggered the self-destruct." "You stupid girl," Marcus roared. He lunged for the door as if he could stop the 500-year-old mechanism. "Run!" Julian yelled. He grabbed Rose, and they sprinted back toward the tunnel entrance. Inside the vault, the blue light intensified. The ancient canisters of the breath of Judas were being subjected to temperatures rivaling the surface of the sun. But the heat wasn't staying in the vault. The pressure was building. Sarah abandoned Marcus, sprinting for the exit. Marcus stood frozen, watching his billion-dollar payday evaporate in a flash of blue fire. "No!" Marcus screamed. Boom! The shockwave hit them. Julian threw Rose to the ground, covering her head with his arms. The explosion wasn't nuclear, but it was massive. The vault door blew outward. The ceiling of the chamber cracked. The C4 charges Sarah had set were triggered by the heat. The entire mine began to collapse. "The shaft." Julian hauled Rose up. Dust choked the air. Rocks the size of cars were falling around them. They ran blindly through the dust, stumbling over debris. The elevator was gone, crushed by falling rock. The service ladder. Julian pointed to a rusted iron rung set into the rock wall. They scrambled up hand over hand as the world below them was swallowed by the earth. Rose's muscles screamed. Her lungs burned. But she climbed. She climbed for her mother. She climbed because she refused to die in a hole with a greedy old man. They breached the surface, gasping for air, rolling onto the hot desert sand, just as the ground beneath them slumped inward. A massive sinkhole opened up, where the mine entrance had been swallowing the facility whole. Dust plumed into the sky like a mushroom cloud. Silence returned to the desert. Rose lay on her back, staring at the blue sky. She was covered in dirt, blood, and soot. Julian rolled over, coughing. He looked at the crater. "Marcus?" he asked. "Gone," Rose rasped. "And the plague?" "Incinerated," Rose said. "Lorenzo's chemistry was specific. Extreme heat neutralizes the toxin." Julian fell back onto the sand. He started to laugh. It was a breathless, hysterical sound. "You realized the password was a trap?" he asked. "Lorenzo was a paranoid genius," Rose said, wiping mud from her face. "He knew his descendants would be greedy. He made sure the real password was a phrase of humility. I gave him the phrase of arrogance instead." Julian turned his head to look at her. His eyes were soft. "You just destroyed $1 billion in assets, and my only living relative," Julian said. "You're welcome," Rose replied. Julian reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm. "I think I owe you that coffee now." 6 months later, the grand hall of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was buzzing with the murmurs of the academic elite. Champagne flutes clinked a sound that used to make Rose Vance flinch, but tonight sounded like victory. At the podium, Professor Arthur Sterling adjusted his spectacles. He looked every bit the distinguished scholar, basking in the glow of his recent discovery regarding pre-Babylonian syntax. "Genius," Sterling droned into the microphone, "is a lonely pursuit. When I wrote The Roots of Language, I had to fight against the current of common thought. I had to stand alone." In the back of the hall, leaning against a marble pillar, Julian Thorne smirked. He whispered to the woman standing next to him, "He really loves the sound of his own voice, doesn't he?" Rose Vance smoothed the skirt of her deep emerald evening gown. She wasn't wearing an apron. She wasn't holding a tray. She was holding a glass of vintage Pinot Noir. And this time, she was the one drinking it. "Let him finish," Rose said, her eyes sharp. "I want him to dig the hole a little deeper." "And so," Sterling concluded, raising his hands, "I accept this Lifetime Achievement Award with humility. Thank you." The applause began polite, restrained. "Excuse me." The voice cut through the applause like a knife. Julian Thorne strode down the center aisle. The room fell silent. Everyone knew Julian Thorne. His face had been plastered across every business magazine in the country after he restructured Thorne Dynamics into a clean energy firm following the tragic mining accident in Nevada. "Mr. Thorne," Sterling stammered, his smile faltering. We weren't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," Julian said, hopping lightly onto the stage. He took the microphone from the professor's hand. "But I'm a big fan of fiction, and your career, Arthur, is the greatest work of fiction I've ever read." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling demanded, turning red. "You said genius is a lonely pursuit," Julian said, his voice cold. "But you didn't work alone, did you? You had a student, a brilliant student, whose thesis you stole, whose career you ruined, and whose research you are currently accepting an award for." Julian gestured to the back of the room. "Rose." Rose walked down the aisle. The click of her heels on the hardwood floor was the only sound in the room. She walked with her head high, the shy waitress from the Obsidian gone forever. She climbed the stairs and stood face to face with the man who had destroyed her life. "Hello, Professor," Rose said. "Security," Sterling squeaked. "Remove this woman. She is a disgraced student. She is unstable." "Actually," Rose said, pulling a folded document from her clutch, "I'm the new owner of the building." She turned to the audience. Mr. Thorne has just endowed the linguistics department with a $50 million grant, on one condition, that the department head is replaced immediately. Julian signaled to the wings of the stage. 2 police officers stepped out, followed by the dean of the university. "Arthur Sterling," the dean said, looking pale. "We have received the digital forensics report from Mr. Thorne's private investigators. It proves conclusively that the files for the roots of language originated on Ms. Vance's personal drive 3 years ago. The board has voted to revoke your tenure, effective immediately." "And the officers," Julian added pleasantly, "are here to discuss the fraud and embezzlement charges." Sterling looked from Julian to Rose. He crumpled. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving a small, pathetic old man. As the officers led him away in handcuffs, the room was dead silent. Rose took the microphone. She looked out at the sea of shocked faces. "A wise man once wrote that the truth is like water," Rose said, quoting the very ledger she and Julian had deciphered in the desert. "You can dam it, you can bury it, but eventually it will find the cracks, and it will bring the whole house down." She looked at Julian. He winked. Later that night, outside the hall, the autumn air was crisp. "So," Julian said, leaning against his Aston Martin, "Professor Vance has a nice ring to it." "It does," Rose admitted. She looked at him. "You kept your promise. You destroyed him." "I pay my debts, Rose. You saved my life. I gave you yours back." He opened the car door for her. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Where to?" he asked. "I'm hungry," Rose said. "There's a diner in Queens. Terrible coffee, but great pie." "I'm not going to Queens in a tuxedo," Julian protested. "Then you can walk," Rose teased, sliding into the passenger seat. Julian laughed. He got in, started the engine, and looked over at her. "You know I'm looking for a permanent translator for my international division. The pay is better than academia." Rose smiled, watching the city lights reflect in the windshield. "Ask me again after the pie," she said, and as they drove off, Rose Vance realized she would never be invisible again. Wow, what a journey. From a waitress being snapped at for a napkin, to a billionaire's partner taking down her nemesis Rose Vance, is the definition of don't judge a book by its cover. It just goes to show that kindness is free, but disrespect can cost you everything. If you enjoyed this story of hidden genius, instant karma, and sweet revenge, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories like this, maybe a part 2 where Rose and Julian take on the rest of the secret society. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. What was your favorite part? The elevator escape or the final takedown at the university? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next story.